Hey guys, welcome to my tutorial on how to get started on doing an afterthought heel. I say get started because most of the tricky part of doing an afterthought heel is just picking up your stitches and getting that first row going, because after that you're basically just knitting a toe, right? You're just decreasing it down and then Kitchener stitching it closed. So this is focused on how to pick up your stitches and how to get that first row done. And then from there, I'm assuming that you know how to, do decreases and basically do what you would do for a normal, like, top-down sock toe. So what you see here is everything you would need to do this. So I like to have a pencil and paper handy because I will need to figure out where I want to put my afterthought heel. Because as you can see, the other thing you need, of course, is a sock to do a heel on. This sock doesn't have any kind of yarn in here marking where a forethought heel would be. So like I will need to measure it out and figure out where it is that I need my heel to be. And that's going to be part of this in case, you want to do this. I will show you kind of how to do the math and measure all of that out. So I have my sock. I just have one of them here because, I don't need to show you both of them. Also, you will need the yarn for your heel. I'm using this guy. You will need, of course, knitting needles. I do mine with 2 circulars, so that's what I will be showing you. And you either want to use the same needles that you use to knit the sock, or maybe one size smaller if you wanted to make a very dense fabric on the heel. But I'm using the same size that I did on the sock, and that is a US size 1, which is a 2.25 millimeter needle. You will also want to have a ruler so that you can measure out where your heel needs to go. And then this thing here, this is the part of the stand that I'm using to prop up my phone for filming, so just kind of ignore this guy. And I'm going to try and not bonk my needles on this metal stand too much because I know that makes a decent amount of noise that can be very jarring depending on how you're watching this. So the first thing I'm going to do is figure out where my heel needs to go. So I've already written out the foot length of the recipient who's getting these socks, which is 26.5 centimeters. So I want to subtract 10% for ease, or negative ease, which is minus let's just go with 2.5 centimeters, right, to make the math easier. So that then is going to give me a total sock length of 24 centimeters. Right, so that's how long I want the total sock to be. Now, to figure out where I need to put the heel, I need to know how long the heel needs to be. For my sock, I'm going to do the heel with the same number of rows that I did on the toe, so I can just measure the toe and see how long that is, which I'm doing right now. And I know the ruler is kind of reflective and hard to see, but you can see that my toe is just about 4 centimeters. So we'll go with 4 centimeters, because again, it's a nice round number, and subtracting off that ease means that we can be off by a couple of millimeters. All right, so minus 4 centimeters for heel means that 20 centimeters from the toe is where I'm going to want to put in my heel, right? Because 20 centimeters in, then plus that 4 centimeters will give me the proper sock length. So now, oh, I forgot something. The other thing you will need is you will need a just a plastic darning needle, and I always like to have just a little bit of string on it. And this is going to be useful in multiple ways. So right now, what I'm going to use it for is I'm going to use it to mark where my heel is going to go. So I'm going to go ahead and move this guy out of the way, move my sock back in, and measuring from the toe, I'm going to measure 20 centimeters, which I'm sure will be partly out of frame, but let's see, 20 centimeters is right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and stick my little darning needle in there. So now I've marked where 20 centimeters is. And I'm going to go ahead and just use that to just kind of isolate a couple of stitches so that I can easily see the row that is at 20 centimeters, because that's actually the row we're going to be removing. So then I will want to pick up stitches on either side of that. So that's the first way that this darning needle comes in handy. The reason that I have yarn on here is because even though I've done this multiple times, inevitably I always wind up missing a stitch. So that way, and it's always where I started picking them up. Like, it's never convenient to go back and get it. So this allows me to just slip that onto this yarn and just save it so that when I go back and knit through that row, I can just take that missed stitch, slide it off of the waste yarn, and back onto my needle. So depending on how good of a job I do today, maybe you'll get to see that in action, or who knows, maybe today would be the one day that I managed to not do that. So the way that you're going to go ahead and pick up stitches, if you've never picked up stitches in the middle of your work before, let's see if I can get this guy to focus. Come on camera. No, you, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just pick up, and of course I'll start at the edge when I'm actually doing it, but basically I want to pick up the right leg of my stitches when I'm doing this. So maybe I'll do this here where the yarn is a little bit lighter and easier to see. So you can see each of your stitches makes a little V, right? Little V. Right there. So that's one stitch, and then its neighbor, V. So I'm going to pick up the right leg of this stitch on my needle, like that. And then I would go to its neighbor and pick up the right leg of that stitch. And this is a little tough because I'm looking at my viewfinder right now to make sure that it actually stays in focus, so it's very strange to not be looking at my yarn. And then I would just go to the next one and pick up the right leg of that stitch. Right, and so I would just do that all the way across until I've picked up, half of my total stitches, which for this sock, this is a 72 stitch sock, so that's going to be 36 socks. And I want to do that before I ever cut my yarn. So where my darning needle is right now, that's the row that I'm going to cut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and look at that row right above it and follow that over. And for this, it may go out of focus because I'm currently looking at my yarn. And again, it's not a big deal if you kind of mess up. Right about there, maybe. Let me make sure. Let's see. The key thing here is to just be patient. Oh, I didn't quite go all the way over far enough. The problem is for me, the stitch that I have on the top kind of pulls the sock, so you want to make sure that you get all the way over. So let's see. Okay, so this is the first stitch of the back of my sock. All right, so I picked up the right leg of that guy, and at this point I can go ahead and take this out so it's not getting in the way anymore because it was just a place marker. And so now I'm going to go across and I'm going to pick up the right leg of all my stitches, and because, like I said, my fabric is pulling in because of the stitch pattern I did, I'm going to put my hand in there just to kind of hold it flat and steady. So just going to go ahead, you see, and pick up the right leg of each stitch. And it can get a little bit tedious, and sometimes you just kind of have to take a break, put it down, let your eyes recover a little bit, depending on, what yarn you're using and all of that. If you're using like a really dark yarn with not a lot of contrast, this definitely is not an easy process. So just be patient with yourself and recognize that you might make mistakes. And that's okay, because mistakes are always fixable. So I'm going to go ahead and keep doing this, and I will probably speed up through this process because I'm sure you guys don't want to sit here and watch me do this, but you can see, let's see if I can get it to focus. Okay, so what you can see here is I have picked up the right leg of 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 stitches so far, right? So I'm just going to keep doing that all the way across, and then when I have gone all the way across, then I'm going to come back with my other needle and I'm going to skip a row in between, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the row one past that. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this, do all of that, and then I will be back right after a jump cut. And we're back. So now I have picked up all my stitches, so you can see I've just pulled through, right, because I'm using circulars. I've just pulled them through so the cables are on the stitches, just because they're a little bit thinner than the needle, so it pulls at the fabric a little bit less. Come on, focus. But as you can see, so I've picked up 2 rows of stitches. Each one has half my total stitches. And then in between those, there is also a row. So you want to leave a row in between the 2 that you pick up, and only 1 row, because this row in the middle here is the yarn that you're going to be unraveling, and that's where your heel's going to go. So if you leave more than 1 row, then you run into troubles, because then you're going to have other stitches unraveling. You want to just leave 1 row in between these 2 that you are picking up. And this is exactly the same process I would use as if I had put in a line of waste yarn for a forethought heel, but I actually find it to be easier to do a true afterthought heel picking up stitches, because with the waste yarn, it's always loose kind of at these edge stitches, and then I have a hard time figuring out what I'm supposed to be picking up. So for me, I always find this to be a little bit easier And all I did the same process for both. I just picked up the right leg of each stitch for both of these rows. And if you're experienced, you say, oh, but you're going to be knitting those rows in different directions, which means that one of those sets of stitches is probably going to be twisted. And you're probably correct. But for me, it's more about getting the stitches on my needles, because it's easy enough to knit twisted stitches through the back loop, right? I can fix that pretty easily later on. I just knit the first row through the back loop. I'd rather just get them on. Because that's really the most stressful and scary part, is getting them on the needle and then cutting that yarn. And once they're on there, then they're on, and I can fix everything later, right? Okay, so now, and I probably have split stitches. I don't know if you can see it, but there's little bits where I have split stitches. But, you know, that's not the important part. The important part is just getting them on your needles and then getting going. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I just slid my hand in there just to kind of pull the fabric firm. And one of the things I forgot to mention is you will need a pair of scissors, of course, to cut this. And so now I'm going to very carefully maneuver my scissors in the middle of this row that I left, where I didn't pick up stitches. I'm just going to very carefully snag the loop right there. So you can see I snagged. It's not going to focus, and I don't have a free hand to try and get it to focus. Come on. Come on. Anyway, so I snagged a leg of one of the stitches in that middle row, and now this is the scariest part. It's just, I'm just going to cut that stitch. So now I've done it. I've committed. There is no going back. So now I'm going to look around and try and figure out where my little, oh, my darning needle fell on the floor. Okay, so now I'm going to use the darning needle again, and that's what I'm going to use to pull the yarn through to free up my stitches that I picked up. So I'm just going to go in one direction, and then I'll come back and do the other direction. But basically, I just pull these stitches out one leg at a time. Right, so you can just see I'm very, see, finger poking through right there. So I'm just pulling this yarn in the middle that I cut through one stitch at a time. And this way, it helps me to see if I've missed any stitches, which is of course not as likely in the middle. It's much more likely that I missed a stitch in the end, but it does happen sometimes in the middle where I just didn't pick one up. But yeah, I'm just going to keep doing this, and I actually think I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use one of the metal ends of my needles, because they're just a little bit slicker, a little bit easier to wedge in there. And I'm just gonna keep doing this. And once I've actually made the cut, I actually find this part to be somewhat relaxing. I mean, of course, it's stressful because you're looking for whether or not you missed stitches. But in another way, it's kind of relaxing because, you know, it's just very, very methodical, very repetitive, nice, simple work. So I'm just going to keep doing this all the way across. And of course, you know, because I'm doing it on camera, it's taking me way longer than it normally does. But also my yarn is very curly, so it keeps getting in the way. So then I can't see what it is that I'm supposed to be doing. But I also find that it's easier kind of as you go along, if you kind of stick your finger through to help kind of pull the stitches apart, because that will help stretch this row of knitting in the middle and help to, you know, make it easier to get underneath those legs and pull that out like I'm doing. And you want to make sure that as you get, you know, closer to the edge, which I am, oh, whoops, oh no, oh no, there we go, whoops, oh well, such is life. Sometimes you grab just one of the plies and you pull the ply through and you screw up your tail. Oh dear, what did I do? Sometimes you just gotta fix things as you go along. Let's see. Oh, knotted it all up. There we go. Alright, I'm just gonna go ahead and cut off that little end bit where it's getting knotted, because this tail only needs to be long enough to weave in, and I'm actually probably going to weave it in as I go, which means that it doesn't even have to really even be long enough to get onto the darning needle. It just has to be long enough to wrap around the stitches as I go. So I'm just going to keep doing this. And the important thing here, so if this is your first Afterthought heel maybe, and you are feeling like you're going to ruin it, don't worry, you're not going to ruin it. The important thing with doing this kind of thing is to just have confidence in yourself that you picked up your stitches right, and if you didn't, then you didn't, and you can fix it later. It's not a big deal. But as long as you kind of go slow and you're keeping an eye on what you're doing, you'll see if you missed a stitch. Like if you pull your yarn out somewhere and that stitch wasn't on your needle, you'll see it. You'll see it just hanging out all by itself. And if that happens, then you just come in with your little darning needle and pick it up and put it back on your needles later. All right, so I'm getting towards the end here, so I'm going to make sure that I don't go past the stitches that I've picked up, because, you know, that's no good. This yarn is just coming unwound all over the place. Come on. Oop, there we go. All right, and you can see, so I'm just about at the end, so now I have to be careful that I don't go too far, but you can see the yarn is still going through those stitches that are on my needle, so I still want to pull it out further. Alright, so now all of the stitches on this needle here, at least for this side of this needle, have been freed up. So I don't want to pull it through any more down there. It is still, however, going through this stitch on this top needle, which hopefully you can see. I'm sure this is probably going in and out of focus like crazy, but so I want to pull it out just right there so that it just comes out of that. And that's it. So now I'm done pulling stitches out, because now if I pull it out any further, then I'm undoing stitches on the front of my work. So I'm done with that guy. And now I'm going to move back over to this side, right, because I cut my yarn in the middle. So now I need to unravel all the stitches on the other side. So I'm just going to keep doing that. And I think you guys have probably gotten the gist of kind of how this goes. So I'm going to pause again, jump cut, and then when I come back I will kind of show you how I knit my first row, how I pick up stitches on the edges, because I pick up a couple of stitches on the edge just to kind of prevent there from being any gaps. So I'll show that, and I'll kind of show how I knit the first row, and then like I said, I'm assuming that you know how to do a toe, so from there it's just all knitting toes. So like I said, I'll be right back after the jump cut. Alright, so now we've done it. We now have a big gaping hole in the back of our sock, and I have half of my total stitches right on each needle, and I have my little tails, and now I have my yarn that I'm going to be using for my heel. So let's go ahead and knit the first row. So you can start knitting either on the top or bottom of your heel. I guess I consider the top of the heel to be the leg part and the bottom to be the foot part. It really doesn't matter, because again, you're going to be knitting in the round, so you can start on whichever one tickles your fancy the best. I'm going to go ahead and start on the leg side. And so now I'm going to try and do this without getting my knitting needles everywhere and while staying in frame, which is always kind of tough for me. So I'm going to make sure I have, a nice generous tail on my heel yarn so that I can weave that in later. And I'm going to weave in these little ends as I go, because they're so short and I hate weaving in short ends with a darning needle. So I've shown this before, but the way that I do that is then I get this yarn around my left hand, and I'm just going to go ahead and knit as normal. So let's see. This is always a little bit tricky trying to get these things started. So the way that you do this to weave in your ends as you go is you take the end and you weave it the opposite direction you'd normally wrap your yarn, and then you wrap your your working yarn, and then you just knit that stitch normally. And of course this one doesn't want to pull tight because it's just hanging out there in the middle of nowhere. So you knit that first stitch, and then the second stitch you don't do anything with your tail that you're weaving in. You just knit normally, because you can see right now it's crossed. So now when I pull this yarn and I do my yarn over, it kind of locks down that tail there. And so you just keep doing those two stitches basically for weaving in this tail end. And you don't want to pull it too tight or it'll cause your fabric to pucker a little bit. I struggle with that. But yeah, you just do that, and you'll see, I haven't picked up my stitches super neatly, so I have to deal with kind of split stitches and stuff as I go along. But the point is, the stitches are on my needle, and it's a lot easier to deal with that once they're on your needle than before. At least I find that to be the case. I'd much rather deal with all of that now than trying to figure that out while I was picking up those stitches. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and work all the way across. Again, trying to like not go out of frame too much and, you know, do a proper job knitting. Always kind of a tough thing doing these demos. It's very strange because like I want to watch the screen because I want to make sure that everything is properly in focus, but then again I can't really knit while watching the screen because I'm one of those knitters who still really needs to like look at my knitting, at least have, you know, kind of like half an eyeball on my knitting while I'm doing it, or else I don't know, I just tend to lose my place. I wish I could knit entirely by feel, but and maybe someday. Maybe that's just something I just haven't been doing this long enough for, but I do kind of need to keep a little bit of an eye on it, especially when like I'm weaving in ends and I'm dealing with, you know, picked up stitches that might be split or something like that. It's definitely a good idea to keep an eye on your work, which means that if this is out of focus right now, that's why. Or if I keep drifting out of frame, that's why. All right, so I've now come just about to the end of this tail. So I'm just going to go ahead and call that good. That end will be woven in enough. You know, it just has to not come out, basically, is all that really matters. So now I'm just going to go ahead and keep knitting, knitting. Doop, doop, doop. And I know my knitting needles are rubbing on the table, and I'm sure that's probably super annoying. And if I could think of a way to fix that, I totally would, but I can't. Other than kind of trying to hang them off the edge. But anyway, so now I have come to the end of this row. So now I want to pick up some stitches to make sure that there's not a big gap here in the corner. And I also want to make sure that I pull that guy tight. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to pick up, I'm going to say 2 stitches on each side in the corners here. So I don't know how well I'll be able to zoom in on this. Let's see, come on, focus. So the first stitch I'm going to pick up, let's see, can I find a needle to point with, is I'm going to pick up a stitch through this bar and this bar together. So let's see if I can do that while staying in frame. Let's see. This is always a bit of a challenge. Like there is no, at least in my experience, there's not always a great way to do this. I always kind of have to, you know, figure it out as I go along. Okay, so I picked those 2 bars up with my other needle. And now I'm just going to go ahead and take this needle, kind of squishing my yarn around a little bit, get it up through both of those bars at once, kind of like a knit 2 together. And this is not like super graceful. Sometimes you just got to kind of force it and then knit through that. So yeah, so that's the first stitch, and that's going to be on this needle. The other stitch is going to be on the other needle. So let's go ahead and make sure all my tails are managed. And I'm actually going to move my camera up just a little bit in the hopes that that way I can hold my knitting farther off the table and then not have my needles banging all over the place. Okay, so let's see, where were we? We were over here. So, oh, that might have just made it worse. So now I'm going to pick up another stitch similarly through these 2 bars right here. This one I can just go ahead and do right directly on the needle. Just yarn over, pull through. Again, this is not something that's done with a great amount of finesse. You just kind of have to want it enough. So there I've picked up that stitch. And now I'm just going to go ahead and knit across, again weaving in this end as I go. So come on, out of focus. There we go. All right, so I wonder if maybe if I put my other sock down here, then I can get my needles to rub against that. Not the table, because I have to imagine that is like super annoying. And now, let's see. Oh, these stitches actually aren't twisted. Perfect. None of my stitches wound up twisted. But if they are, you can either knit them through the back loop, or you can just have one row of twisted stitches. I find that people, I think, get really hung up on the aesthetics of how like a sock heel looks. And while, you know, of course it is an important part of the aesthetic of the entire sock, I think that it's just, you know, it's not as big of a deal as people make it out to be, because the fact is, I mean, the heel's in your shoe. or, you know, on the floor. Like, it's probably the least seen part of a sock. So, you know, if you have a row of stitches that you accidentally twisted, or if, let's say, you want to do a wrap and turn heel and you don't want to pick up your wraps, don't do it. It's not like it really matters. The point is that it has to be structurally sound, and if it's structurally sound, then that's all that's important. The aesthetics, they're great if you want to spend that kind of time on it, but if all you care about is the functionality, then don't worry too much about it, because, you know, it'll still keep the sock on your foot. And that's really the important part now, isn't it? And, you know, making something for someone or yourself with a lot of love gone into it. And if, you know, if worrying too much about the aesthetics takes the love out of it for you, then don't do it that way. So, I know, deep thoughts while knitting sock heels, right? But I hate to leave you guys hanging with dead space, so you wind up with me just talking like I am now to fill out the space, so that there's some kind of noise happening while I'm knitting. Alright, so that tail got a little bit too short, so I'm going to call that good in terms of weaving in the ends. I'm just going to go ahead and keep knitting all the way across. Trying not to bonk my knitting needles on the table too much. And I don't ever bother to do any decreases on this first row. Basically, the next row is when I would start decreasing. And there's a couple ways you can do that. You can either, you know, decrease and then knit a row plain, and just keep doing that every other row until you're down to about a third of the original stitches of the sock. Okay, and now I'm going to pick up the stitches on this side because I didn't do that when I first hit this side. You can actually see I kind of pulled that stitch a little bit loose, but that's okay, not a big deal. We'll get on with it. And here, because I had kind of a garter ridge in the pattern here, that's going to be a little bit tougher to pick up stitches. So I'm just going to kind of stick it in wherever, and, you know, it'll work. It'll be fine. Like I said, it's the heel of a sock, so it's not like the aesthetics are the most important part here. The point is that it keeps your foot in the sock. So I'm just going to kind of stick my needles in and hope for the best. Alright, so there's the one for that row, or for that side, and now I still do need to pick up another one for this needle, since I never did that at the very beginning. Anyway, so like I was saying, you can either decrease every other row, just until you have, I like to decrease down to roughly a third of my starting number of stitches. So then here I'm going to pick up this, this stitch through those two. I like to decrease down to about a third of my starting number, so here I would decrease down until I had about 12 stitches on each needle, and then, you know, go ahead and Kitchener off the toe. Or the way I will be doing this produces a little bit, or I'm sorry, Kitchener the heel. The way I'm doing it produces a little bit more rounded toe or heel, depending on, you know, what it is that you're doing. Like I said, I use the same thing for the toe, but for the toe of this sock, I basically decreased every other row until I had 2/3 of my initial starting number of stitches. So in that case, I decreased every other row until I had 24 stitches on each needle. And then I decreased every row until I had a third of my starting number of stitches. So in this case, I decreased every row until I had 12 stitches on each needle, and then I Kitchenered off. It just produces something that's a little bit more rounded, and I like that for toes because I think it fits a wide variety of, you know, foot shapes. And I think it'll be good for heels too, because I've noticed that in my heels where I decreased like every other row, and it's just a very kind of triangular heel, I've noticed that I wind up with just like a little bit of extra fabric in the back that, you know, is because heels don't tend to be nice and square. They tend to be round. So, you know, might as well make your heel a little bit rounder. And I just realized I totally forgot to decrease on this one. I'm just going to go ahead and tink back and get to decreasing. See, I was talking too much. I distracted myself. But yeah, so in this case, because I picked up an extra 2 stitches on each row, I'll basically just do my normal amount of decreases, but to 2 stitches more than what I would have before. So like, I'll decrease every other row until I'm down to 26, and then every row until I'm down to 14, and then call that good. So yeah, I think that's going to be it for this. Let me know if there's any other tutorials you guys want to see. Let me know if this was at all helpful, or if maybe there's something I could do to make it better, or, you know, to make tutorials better in the future. But yeah, I'm just going to, you know, keep knitting my heel and get these out in the mail to the recipient, because the end of winter is rapidly approaching, and I'm sure he'd like to be able to wear them, before it gets to be too warm in summer. So yeah, that's going to be it for me today. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys later.